Welcome. Welcome to Wharton Moneyball. Welcome to another hour of sports analytics here on the Wharton Podcast Network. This is Cade Massey hosting today with the whole team. We have Eric Bradlow in here. We have Jensen in here. We have Adi Wyner, and we will have a guest. We have a guest already. We'll bring him in momentarily. We're going to go with our usual format. We're going to have a guest first half hour. We'll do open lines in the second half hour. We are recording on a Tuesday afternoon, as we typically do. The show will go up on Wednesday. It is the first week of August. The sports calendar is turning. Soon we will begin diving into all things football. But we've got baseball heating up as well, and we will for the next couple of months. And there's always lots to talk about on the baseball front. To help us with that, longtime friend of the show, Travis Sawchik. If you guys have been listening, you know Travis. If you pay attention to baseball, especially baseball analytics, you know Travis. He's had a couple of big books, including Big Data Baseball. He came out of the world covering the Pirates, and he saw firsthand the data revolution with those guys. And then also the MVP machine, which I think it was more Astros, but it wasn't as focused on a single team. They just happened to be one of the leaders in that world. But you can find Travis's writing over the years. He's been at 538, Fangraphs, The Athletic, Baseball America. He's done some work with Driveline. I'm going to ask him about. You'll see him in lots of places. Travis, we always love having you. Thanks for making time for us.
Yeah, great to be back with you guys, and it's always a pleasure to be with you.
I'm in the middle of nowhere with modest Wi-Fi. If things get too bad, Eric Bradlow can jump in here and take lead. Y'all just give me a heads up if that happens. What I'm most interested in, I'm the least baseball guy out here, though I'll shag flies at least as long as y'all will. I'm most interested in some stuff Travis wrote earlier this year on pitching loads. And here's my not attempt to capture it, but just some of the key concepts I'd like to hear more about. I think the whole group would like to hear more about. You guys were talking about better ways to understand the load on a pitcher, and there was some sense that teams weren't getting it right. And in particular, they were pulling some guys when they didn't need to pull guys. And you were using a couple things that really catch my attention. Pitching units, I think. You had some measure of like normalized way of understanding what the actual wear is on a guy from an outing. And then you were playing with, I think of it more from the world of sports science and performance, this acute-chronic workload that is such an important part of managing, as you gear up for a marathon or a half marathon. You've got to worry about, you can only go up so fast. You're managing the acute-chronic ratio. So y'all were applying that to pitchers. And I thought, our audience would love that. I would love that. My guys would love that. Let's hear from Travis about that.
Yeah, so I think the impetus was I was tired of seeing guys get pulled with like no hitters and perfect games with like 80 pitches. And, pitch counts really aren't science. It's kind of a number. It's just a very rough, generalized number that hopes to measure fatigue, but I think it's really more of a cover our ass measure in baseball. So if something goes wrong, it can point to the guardrails.
Adi, give us your understanding of pitch counts. How well are they used in baseball?
So they're used almost like magic numbers, and Travis is about to tell us that there isn't really science behind that. That doesn't make managers and commentators and people all around baseball think that there's something special about, say, 100 pitches, and they will pull pitchers when they hit that mark, or even if they're just shy of it, if they give up a hit, it's just sort of this it's being used as a totem almost, and I'm not sure there's much behind it. We know historically that pitchers went way past that number. I mean, 150 was absolutely common for a starting pitcher. Finishing the game was common. They didn't have to throw a Maddox, which is like an incredibly low pitch count, nine inning game. So there's been a jump. Now, obviously, they throw a lot harder than they used to. So things have changed. To make a comparison for the yesteryear is not appropriate today, I guess. And people have noticed that the Tommy John incidences and injuries are higher, but they're higher than ever, and they continue to get higher despite the fact that we are imposing these limits. And that, I think, sets up the quandary that we're in right now, which is if they're doing such great things to measure fatigue and are acting on it, why do injury rates stay just as high or even get higher?
Yeah, and I would just to follow up on what Adi said real quick. I think there is science behind the more you pitch, the more
Well,
tear on your body. It's just the kind of, I think, like a pitch count of 100 or a pitch count like I think we read more science into these kind of numbers because they sound very precise or whatever. But they I mean, as Travis was telling us, it's just threshold, guesswork threshold.
So we'll pitch it back to Travis, who's been able to get back with us. Travis, you should know that Adi and then Shane just gave us a little bit of background saying these numbers seem to have emerged. They're very different from the workload the guys used to do years ago. Yes, they save the wear and tear some, but Adi's saying, look, it seems to still, we still have lots of wear and tear, so it's not doing the perfect trick. So back to you, Travis.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do at Driveline is just understand total fatigue and recovery better. And part of it is, and we're lucky to have someone like Josh Hedgka, who's a great data scientist researcher, and he's also a minor league pitcher. So he's been wearing wearable devices and tracking how all his throws, his catch play, his bullpens, his game work, and he's seen how his body recovers after. So we've come up with, he's played a role in creating these fatigue units, which tries to capture every throw you make in a week and the intensity of the throw. And we use our pulse technology. But yeah, just the idea that we need more information, more data, and pitch counts aren't capturing it all. And so we use pulse to help create this workload unit that measures the actual stress in the arm in real time, and we can estimate even if a pitcher doesn't have pulse on, we can better estimate just by the count of their throw types during a week. And then we applied, acute-chronic workload ratio. We didn't invent that. That's been a long way to measure.
Travis, let me stop you. Let me
Olympic sports. Okay.
Let me stop you before you go to acute-chronic ratio, because you've created this new data unit, this workload unit of some kind, and you're saying you built it up with real-time sensors on actual athletes so you can differentiate the kinds of pitches. And once you have it, though, you can estimate that same thing. You can kind of approximate, let's say, even if the pitcher's not wearing that unit, if you know what they're doing. So can you tell us more about that? Because that's the building block of where you're going from here. So tell us more about that unit, like what moves it around. Also, you guys, he mentioned they're not just tracking in-game workload. They're tracking the days between as well. So they need all of that to do the acute chronic thing. He's going to do it in a minute. But again, back to this basic unit. Tell us more about that basic unit. It's fascinating. You're saying basically all pitches aren't created equal, I think.
That's right. And there's a big difference between catch play, a day or two after a start, just throwing the outfield or with another teammate. There's a difference between a bullpen throw and there's a difference between a game intensity throw. So not all throws during the week are the same, but we want to add them all up because all those values mean something. And what a lot of athletes have realized in wearing the pulse technology is that they were overworking on what were supposed to be lower intensity days. They're doing too much. And if you're not tracking that, then you're raising your overall wear and tear in the body, the stress in the body before you even go to a game performance. So one of the big lessons for most guys is they do too much throwing or intensity on days when they're supposed to be taking it easier. That's one of the big insights. But taking that, and again, this all derives from the insights we've learned from putting this on actual athletes and seeing what their week looks like, wherein what was modus is now pulse. What does a game-like throw mean in terms of torque on an elbow, shoulder versus a bullpen or catch play. So it's all derived from that, and then we can extrapolate out. Like we modeled how much stress did Yamamoto really put on his body in pitching Game 6 and 7 in the World Series. How much stress did he really? How dangerous was that? So we can extrapolate out and kind of use what athletes like Hedgka have done as proxies for what other athletes are doing in real time. So again, the problem with pitch counts is that might be the only thing a lot of organizations, especially amateur organizations, are measuring in the course of a week. But that's not the only throws that matter. So we want to have a better idea of the total volume of work and how that can inform what an athlete is prepared to take on during a game day, during a total week. And even Hedgka, who I think deserves a lot of credit for doing this research, he changed how he operated in a week as a relief pitcher, and he had a better understanding of what his body could withstand and when he could go, what would it take to go multiple innings and prepare for that kind of workload. So there's all sorts of insights to be gained from this, but it's essentially a smarter pitch
Okay.
count, and it's better than just using 100 pitches as a kind of cover your ass one size fits all metric for a starting pitcher at the pro game.
Well, take us that next step to the acute chronic workload. And I'll try to get us a little bit of a head start by saying, look, this is all training, essentially all sports science. It says you can have a more acute spike in your workload if you have a bigger chronic capacity. You build up your capacity, your chronic workload, and that gives you more room. It's almost a percent. Like when you're training up for long runs, it's like you don't want to increase your weekly distance more than 10% of the time or something like that. And so
That's
you're
right.
taking this general framework and adopting it to pitching workload. And so give us some of the insights you get from that framework.
Yeah. I mean, the root of driveline is basically just borrowing, stealing, the sports science that Olympic sports had built up over time, and they're much better at training athletes. They have a longer history, more data. So we basically borrowed a lot of those processes, and we applied it to baseball. And the general rule is you don't want to that ratio. You want to keep it under 1.2 or 20%. You don't have a 20% spike. I think it is. You don't want the acute to jump the chronic by 20%, I believe. I haven't revisited my March piece in a while, but I believe it's 1.2, or the 20% bump. So if you can keep your rolling kind of average within that range, we believe you're generally in a safe range. We're never going to prevent all injuries, but we believe there's this band where if you don't go over that mark, you're probably in a green light territory. And we had some fun with it because we wondered, how did Nolan Ryan build up for his season? How did he withstand these 160 pitch counts in a game when he was throwing mid-90s, you have to assume? Some people have done it, so what did his workload look like? And it was fun, just in that Nolan Ryan piece, I found an old Sports Illustrated article where he's starting to ramp up like high-intensity throwing in January. So he was building up that base load well before spring training, and he operated, I think, a lot differently than a lot of pitchers did at that time. So that's just an anecdotal example, but yeah, to your point, it's basically borrowing from Olympic sports science and sports with a longer history and better ways of training and adapting athletes and applying that to baseball. And that's a lot of the root of driveline, is taking a lot of those, weight, underload, overload training, all these things that have existed and all these other sports for so long, and applying it to baseball and measuring everything. If you can measure it, you can improve it. That's at the root of a lot of what we do. And I think fatigue work. We got to baseball as an industry has to do a better job of keeping pitchers on the mound, even with all yes, there's more stress than ever on bodies, but we have to measure more. And if we can measure more, then we can learn and improve upon that, hopefully. So workload units, acute chronic ratio, these are just kind of early efforts at a better understanding of what fatigue is, what it looks like, and how to better manage pitchers and athletes in the course of a given week in pitching.
Travis, is it safe to say that the focus of like 100 pitch count, and maybe more generally, has been almost exclusively on the acute workload, and they haven't thought about the need to manage the chronic? You want to manage the acute down, but you want to manage the chronic up. Is that a simple way to think about this?
I think so.
It leads to the paradox where by overly focusing on the acute, they paradoxically reduce the chronic, and so they reduce the capacity for the acute.
Yeah. Well, the problem is they're only measuring the acute. They have, most organizations, at least for a long period of time, have had no idea what an athlete's actual chronic workload was. I think that's probably changing to some degree. This is proprietary stuff for a lot of organizations, so who knows what. I have to think like the Yankees, Dodgers, some clubs are probably actively monitoring a lot of this at this point. But I think the problem with pitch counts for the longest time is you're just measuring the acute aspect, and you're flying blind with the chronic. And all the ramp up and build ups are kind of the same template, same cloth for everyone. And again, when we've had athletes start to wear pulse and monitor this, there's often surprised. I've talked to Nick Martinez about this, and other athletes are like, wow, I had no idea I was doing so much on my off days. And so I have to think that's probably a common thing across baseball. pitchers don't want to feel like they're not doing anything. Their guilt. Oh, I got to do something today. But you might be detrimental to your long-term health or even in-game performance if you're doing too much on your off days. So, yes, to your point, Cade, it's just we've measured acute pretty well. There's a decent database on that going back to, I think, pitch counts and Baseball Reference go back to 1988. But chronic, we don't have any database publicly on that.
Right.
And
Okay.
I do think something like
So
workload units could be very helpful.
one last question for me, and then I'll open it up to the guys. But in the article that I read, or articles I read, you had some examples just to make it give us an example. It seemed to me that a more complete modeling, at least in the illustrations you gave, showed the capacity for some pretty big spikes beyond the 100 pitch count. Like you were saying, it looks to us like this guy could have thrown, I don't remember the exact numbers, but like 130, 140 and not been too
Right.
risky. Is it really that extreme a difference from what we're seeing actually managed on the field, which is what might be possible?
Yeah, I mean, it has happened. You go back and you look at some of these pitch counts. We used the Nolan Ryan example, of course, but even Yamamoto, we modeled out what his World Series workload looked like, and it was the craziest thing to see him come back out for Game 7. So we modeled how crazy was this, and you have to adapt you can't keep doing that. You can't repeat that
Right.
consecutive times within a couple
Right.
weeks, but you can smooth out that rolling average if you ease off the next outing or that week. And it drives me
I see.
nuts because we
Yeah.
could be seeing more no-hitters and perfect games if we just kind of accepted that pitchers probably do have the capacity for more work within a start. And you think about some of these really efficient outings where you're not throwing as many pitches per inning or you're having more rest per inning. So even every pitch in a pitch count isn't equal. And I think that's another thing, kind of the next stage of workload units, fatigue units, would be there'd be a time element to it within a performance and probably weather conditions and all sorts of other things. So pitch counts are just so
Interesting.
it's a dumb number that doesn't take into account any other factors.
Too coarse. Yeah. Eric.
Yeah, so Travis, I have a ton of questions, but I'll just ask two. But it's one question and a moderator of that. So how nonlinear is the relationship between, let's call it strain or stress from a pitch and the actual miles per hour? And then secondly, how much heterogeneity is there across pitchers and what moderates that heterogeneity? Like, can you flatten your curve, as you said, by more training? Can you flatten it by throwing certain types of pitches? Can you flatten it by rest in between days? So one, how nonlinear are the curves? And what actually do we know drives the shape of those curves, and how much can you do about it?
Yeah, I think your second question first. When we think about like the Nolan Ryan example, if you start building up your chronic workload earlier, longer, then you're building up your base and you can withstand these acute spikes earlier. And it would be interesting to learn more. I mean, I think the breaking ball, fastball, changeup, pitch, the different pitch types certainly can be studied out more too. I think I'd have to ask Josh about how that actually factors into some of this, but I think we had more of a kind of a general measurement on that. And the linear relationship, I don't know if I can give you the best answer on that right now, but that's something we should dive into more and come back on another show and give you a better answer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Travis has some technical challenges, so we won't keep him too long. But before we let him go, what other baseball questions do you have for Travis? Team, we can pick up the workload thing after we let Travis go, but opening up more broadly to the entire MLB right now. Shane just wants to talk about the Red Sox, Travis. That's what he wants to know.
No, this is actually I guess it came up. I think it's a general team question, is that how much, kind of you can kind of measure, because you're talking about for a specific pitcher kind of managing their workload week to week and stuff like that. But you can think about an entire staff. Can you kind of measure whether certain staffs are overtaxed or not. I mean, again, we've got sort of, weak measures, I guess, for that based on outcome. But like, I kind of feel like, people are talking like, oh, wow, my team didn't pick up a bunch of relievers. Our relievers are all going to be gassed by August. Is there some sense, could you kind of almost throw up a rankings of how gassed different pitching staffs are at this point in the season based on how their usage up till now?
Yeah, no, it would be interesting to have team-wide measurements of this too. And I know we have the bullpen grids and consecutive days used and pitch counts per day. And certainly you could apply this to team-wide. And maybe to Eric's question too, the linear. We know that if you're throwing harder, there's going to be more stress per pitch. But if you've built up a chronic workload, or some guys better able to handle that. So yeah, there's definitely team-wide applications of this. We just need, and we don't know team to team how much proprietary data is being kept in this, in the workload silo. And it'd be great to have more public information on this. So much of it, we're a little flying blind. We're flying blind on the outside too. And the amateur game is a whole nother. We really need more kids and more data on kids too. That's a different topic for a different day. But yeah, to your point,
Right.
we should have a better idea of bullpens. Are they burnt out? So there's so many applications for just thinking about fatigue differently and just having more. We just need more data in the system.
Travis, we're just clear of the trade deadline. What storyline or two are you most interested in following between now and the end of the season?
I mean, I guess everybody, the Dodgers. That's all anyone wants to talk about. You either love them or hate them. But I do think.
Well, I didn't bring it up.
A question. Well, if I was a Dodgers executive, I would want to be the third team to try to chase down a third consecutive World Series title. I think that's true dynasty status. So winning the Skubal sweepstakes makes a lot of sense. There's the interesting thing about like the public World Series models don't even capture it, that ace starting pitchers, the best pitchers take on more innings in the postseason. So I think even like the Fangraphs World Series chances are probably underselling the Dodgers' likelihood of winning again, because Skubal and Yamamoto and their best pitchers, Edwin Diaz now being back, are going to take on more innings. So I think that's compelling just for a historical standpoint, and what that means for if the Dodgers win a third title, the public's going to look at it as a very unfair game, and what does that mean for labor negotiations? So that's a fascinating storyline. Yeah, Red Sox, they gave up an awful lot to upgrade catcher, and Curtis Mead, that was unfortunate. I like what the Guardians did the deadline. I like what the Rays did. I thought the Pirates, they had upgraded their bullpen, and they did. So those are my.
Did you think that Travis? You think what the Tigers gave up? I mean, acquired from the Dodgers for Skubal was worth it? It seemed like an incredibly small haul, and that other teams should have been able to cough up a lot more. I almost felt like it was an insider job.
I was surprised that there wasn't more. A team like the Brewers, I understand they're rational operators and they don't want to trade too much of future value for today value because they view each season as kind of, a slot machine pool. But I'm surprised another team didn't outbid that, if that's indeed the case, because imagine Skubal, Mizorowski staff. You're not going to have this many opportunities if you're the Brewers to really be have a World Series caliber pitching staff and team to make that thrust through October. So I am surprised there was not a better offer, assuming that this was the best offer out there. And of course, teams' evaluation of talent can differ from public top 100 lists and prospect rankings, but I was surprised. It seemed a little light because this is arguably the best pitcher ever traded at the deadline. One of them, anyway. The best left-handed pitcher in baseball gets traded at the trade deadline, and there's not a super elite prospect involved. And for the Dodgers, I know people have joked it's not a rental; it's simply they're just onboarding Skubal now. So it's just they're one of the few teams who could extend him as well. So
Well, I think that's a big part of it. I'm sure teams like the Brewers or or maybe a little gun shy on the Skubal because they, it's a lot. The Dodgers can think, oh, this is prospects we're giving up for, a long-term thing. If you give up a bunch of prospects and he doesn't re-sign with you, then you kind of, that's going to make, I think, some of the smaller market teams gun shy. That's kind of my interpretation of some of this.
Unless you have a ring in the bank. I mean, any of us could answer this, but Travis, if you get your thoughts back to what, you were talking about with the Brewers. I think there's 4 or 5 teams in baseball that if you, like, let's take our Phillies here in Philadelphia. You partner him with Christopher Sanchez. How are they not? I mean, the two of them going 1-2, him and Mizrachi, or, put him in, I don't know, with Chris Sale, put him with, even in the Yankees. I don't know if Garrett Cole's the Garrett Cole of old, but you have 2 top pitchers going in the postseason. You're going to be the favorite in most series. So I'm just surprised that, and according to what I saw, Adi may have read differently, the Dodgers didn't even give up any of the top 5 of their farm system talent. So they didn't even give up. They gave up 3 potentially good players, but not even the top 5. So how does this make sense?
It doesn't. Just to add to that, Eric, apparently, and I don't know if this is true, the Yankees tried to negotiate with them, and they wanted Cam Schlittler and they wanted Rice. And I mean, these are the 2 best players in the Yankees currently. And I'm like, what is this? That's why I asked the question. So, right. I mean, it was flippant, but nevertheless, what's going on? This just doesn't seem right.
Yeah, those are the only 2 players from the Yankees I wouldn't trade. The rest of them is
the rest of them can all go.
Okay, but the rest of them can all go.
Okay, Travis, what do you got?
Yeah, I would love to know the exact offers that the Tigers received in this deal. So I just have to assume the Tigers operated rationally and they thought this was the best return package. I have no idea if that's true or not. The Dodgers, and I know people have said that this is a little bit of a tangent, that anyone could have outbid the Dodgers, but the Dodgers don't really need, they have a great developmental system. They're at the cutting edge of sports science and baseball, but they don't need their prospects. They can fill all their voids externally. They can package prospects, go move them for premier talent like they've done for Mookie Betts, for Tyler Glasnow, and now for Skubal, because they can leverage their system because their local media resources, their what do they have, $800 million a year in revenue? No one else can match that. So even though there's this narrative that anyone can match the Dodgers, it's not really true because they can just leverage resources another way. And maybe even they can leverage that in a way that even the Phillies can't. But yes, Skubal, I am surprised there weren't more offers because I think about like the 2001 Diamondbacks and Schilling and
why do we have to?
Randy
why does
Johnson.
This come up in my life like every week?
Yeah,
they combined for 36% of regular season innings, but I think it was like 53% of postseason innings. So it just, with the amount of days off, added urgency, someone like Skubal's take on a much higher percentage of postseason innings, and it just really warps the outcomes. I saw that the Kalshi, I know Fangraphs has the Dodgers at like 31% World Series odds, but I think the public markets have them at 41%, and I think that's probably more accurate given how this deal and just the elite pitchers they have and usage will ramp up in the postseason. So It's going to be tough. I think more teams should have been serious about this. And I know clubs like the Brewers want to act rationally, but to win a World Series, you have to be a little irrational. And I do think you have to push a few more chips in. So I'd love to know what their actual offer was because Mizrachi and Skubal could have made a real impact. And how many years has it been since the Brewers were in the World Series? It's been a long time. And
but Travis,
I find it amusing.
I don't even think it's rational, irrational.
Like the Brewers, using them as an example how baseball's fine and the system's fine is amusing to me because they haven't been in a World Series in like 4 decades. So this seemed like a year to maybe push some more chips in.
So we would jump in there with you and say it's not necessarily irrational. It's considering optimal variance. Like you can't get to the top of the pile, especially if you're under resourced, unless you dial up variance. And so there's a time and place to push in more trips, not irrationally, but because you know you need more variance. And man, oh man, I hate to hear you say that because I'm sitting up here in Wisconsin, 45 minutes from the Brewers with family connections, and it would be fun to have them be a little bit more serious. They keep on outperforming expectations, but then that's only a regular season. They don't advance. Travis, we should let you go. You've been very generous with your time. It's delightful, as always, to talk with you. Wish you the best with what you're working on. Keep on throwing it our way, too. We're always interested in what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for dealing with my technical issues here. I think it worked out, reasonably well.
All right, Travis Sawchik, and that has been the first half of Wharton Moneyball. We still have a half to go. Come back and join us after the break. Welcome to the second half of this week's show. Just off the line with Travis Sawchik, baseball analytics guru and journalist writer. Travis Sawchik. We talked pitching load among some other things. Some technical challenges for sure. We hope the gist of it came across. Adi was a little quiet, and one thing I've learned, guys, just to name something that I've learned slowly over the 12 years we've been doing the show. Adi has these zingers at the end of it. We'll be trying to wrap up. I'm trying to bring the whole thing down, trying to get away, and he'll have one more question, and it will be like the perfect question. And so what Adi is thinking about after 30 minutes of conversation, even if he's been quiet, is often worthwhile. And I don't have any idea what he's about to say, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be interesting. Adi,
you're channeling Columbo.
Yeah. Well, actually, I had used the little chat icon. I mean, the raised hand icon, and you didn't pick it up. So
okay, sorry about that.
That was one of them. It's hard sometimes to get in. But Eric actually answered. There are 2 points that I wanted to make. Eric actually brought it up in more mathematical language, but it was an old point of Rick Peterson's that.
Remind us who Rick Peterson was.
Rick Peterson was one of our earlier kind of regular features on our show. He was a pitching coach with the Oakland A's and then later with the Mets and
the Orioles.
And the Orioles, and so he predates all this sort of high tech Olympic training type stuff that Travis was talking about. But one of the things that he taught us that I guess they knew implicitly without real data was that a pitcher can slide back a little bit and be a little less 100%. Maybe, and this is what Eric was calling nonlinear, and the gains on fatigue side would grow much larger than the loss of velocity, which he translate out to loss of performance. And so basically, what the observation is that you can be throw a little less hard, and you can last a lot longer at a very small cost in performance. And I think that's a message that has been lost in the current application of pitching.
And I think, unfortunately, those small differences make a big difference for certain pitchers on the edge. I think some pitchers, the ones that are on the margins, they need. I probably in their mind they need every advantage they can get, so they're going to throw as hard as they can. So yeah, I mean, I think probably it may even be common knowledge within the industry that you can kind of dial back, and that actually is much better for your long-term health. But the incentive structure.
Let me just finish because I want to say two things. First of all, and I like your point, Shane. Some of them are right in the bubble. They got to be as excellent as they can, or otherwise they're not going to stay. But take a pitcher like Garrett Cole or Tarik Skubal. The guys, imagine getting them 8-9 innings at only 99% of their value instead of 6 innings of their 100. I would take the 8-9.
Yeah, or Mizorowski just dial it back to 99.
Yeah, and
throw
105.
Also, you've talked about like crucial points in a game. Like maybe if you're Garrett Cole, who's he's not as young as he used to be, maybe you say to yourself, all right, look, I'm going to have 15 pitches that are key moments in this game. You know what? Maybe I don't have to throw 97 with nobody on and an 0-2 count in the first inning. Because you know what? This isn't a high leverage situation. So you could easily imagine, if one understood the shapes of these curves and one understood something, as Travis was talking about the endurance of these pitchers, this is an OR problem. And it's a solvable OR problem where in some sense you don't waste effort in low leverage situations. I'm just surprised that teams don't approach it this way, or maybe
I don't think they know the answer to it. Let me just, the thing that really hit me, and there isn't every day that you get a new insight, and Travis gave us one. He basically said that in some level, they are they're missing the training. So what they spend way too much time trying to train acutely, and they don't build up an endurance base.
Yeah.
And that's a really fascinating thing. So in other words, to be a great starter, you have to have endurance. So I'm wondering whether or not, and he actually said it's not the acuteness that kills them. It's not the 9 innings of 140 pitches one time. It's lacking the baseline to keep going.
To be careful, it was that, and that's the biggest thing. But he was also talking about not keeping track of the off day throwing,
the chronic
and that
stuff.
a lot of guys are wearing themselves out because it's too much on off days, and that's a little bit at odds with not having the base. But they're not counting it, and they're not thinking about building the base. Those are two different but related issues.
So which always leads me to the question is, when you have people young, maybe college, maybe even earlier, you got to start experimenting. Take young pitchers and have some of them they work on endurance. You do not let them throw hard very often. They work on throwing 95%, a lot, 90%. And see what happens to their longevity. And let's do an experiment. Nobody wants to do experiments. And one thing that we know truly learned cause is from experiments.
But the one way in which Major League Baseball, I feel like, has kind of developed some aspect of this is that, young pitchers, when you're like kind of getting them up to sort of regular inning load, they kind of do, again, they're training the acute part. They're training the max. They're kind of limiting the max as opposed to the actual average.
Mm-hmm.
But they're progressively trying to increase that match over several starts, whereas maybe they shouldn't be progressively trying to increase that max. They should be trying to increase some rolling window or like an average.
Since I appear to be on an OR bet today, might as well continue
so
down.
Real quick clarification for those who aren't coding it: operations research is what
operations research. Yeah. So, to follow up on Shane's point, couple things. Number one, what is the objective function you're trying to maximize when you suggest possibly dialing down and building up endurance? That's kind of, that's always the question. What are you trying to optimize against? And the second thing as far as I say, we don't really have an understanding of, again, is how much, is it consecutive pitches? Is it rest in between? What does this function look like that actually, and it's probably pretty more complicated than we think. It's probably heterogeneous. And also when Adi talks about an experiment, Adi, here's the problem. Even if you ran that experiment, I think you'd agree, this is a low power setting, which means the experiment you run, are you going to learn about necessarily enough about Adi Wyner's, I'll call it, curve? Maybe not, but I might be able to learn something in aggregate or something that drives that heterogeneity. I'd be skeptical of being able to learn enough for an individual pitcher with the amount of data that you could collect.
Basically the question, as I would design something, would be pretty crude. You have two groups, one that works probably the standard way, whatever they're doing now, and another would be heavily on the endurance side. So you really cut back on their acute pitching. You still do the strength training stuff, so you don't want to lose that. But you really do, because listen, I haven't played too many sports, but pitching is the one thing I'd used to do at a competitive level, not at a high competitive level, but at a competitive level. And every time I got out there, I wanted to throw as hard as I could, because how everybody watching was watching that one thing. How hard can you throw? And that's it. And there was no process in place to train the arm at the levels that I was pitching, which was high school, middle school, college club baseball. But it was all about hard, and no program to strengthen the arm other than the maximum velocity. No long-term benefit. We just was not something that was thought of. Obviously, they think about it more now, but I would imagine creating an endurance program and seeing what that does to a group of pitchers. Obviously, individuals you couldn't get the power on, but to a group, maybe you'd see something. Average treatment effect, they call it.
Guys, let me ask you about another thing that came up in our conversation with him. He was talking about, and he's written about this recently, surprised that the Brewers didn't push some chips in, and in our terms, dial up the variance. Mm-hmm. And he talked about they want to be smart. They're just going to they're going to always follow the numbers. And it just raises this question for me of this is a general question about analytics. Where else in the analytics world are we possibly not considering variance, and where might we miss an important decision, get it wrong if we're only worrying about increasing mean edges?
Oh,
Let me give an example. Eric's got an example. I've got an example I want to ask you. Let me try one first, Eric.
okay, sure.
Okay, you're running an NFL draft room, and you've got a model, and you're a good Bayesian, or not even a Bayesian. You're a good quant, and you realize, well, there's a consensus board. The consensus boards have gotten really good, and they're big. A lot of inputs, and so I can look historically at how much our board adds versus what the consensus board adds. And this is, by the way, this is what sports gamblers do. So when Rufus and I were working on football rankings, we'd have our own model, and then we'd have the line, and we'd blend these together. Basically, you regress your model to the line. So a team ideally should run the data, and they should shrink their board to the consensus. So that they said works by analogy. But here's my question to you. We can all estimate the optimal shrinkage for, minimizing squared error. That's what we do.
Some of the squared errors, Cade. Some of the squared errors.
Okay, I'm sorry. Minimizing the sum of the squared errors.
It's different because it's
MSE. Okay, but hopefully you understand what I'm trying to get at. It's like, to what extent would you prescribe, if you're running an NFL team, to simply shrink optimally according to minimizing the sum of the squared error, versus you want some optimal variation from the board? You want variance that you're willing to trade off a little bit of mean in order to get something different than everybody else is doing. And is that not an example of what we're talking about?
I thought we were talking about if you want to win the World Series or the Super Bowl,
that's a simpler example.
You need to pay more for that extra win and take a little bit more chances at the expense, right? So
yes,
that's more like you're looking at a different question. But it's still high variance. It's all about buying variance.
But also remember the
building.
advantage of doing it in baseball. This is the huge advantage in baseball. Remember, let's take the Brewers, because Shane brought it up during the discussion with Travis. They're not doing it in a situation, if they were to have done this, they know they can win it. Like, this isn't 10 games into the season. This is over 100 games in the season. So they're buying variance in a situation where they know they have enough mean. And so to me, that's the big difference. I want to get variance when I have information, and you have it in the baseball trade deadline. They should have absolutely gone all in. I don't know whether they'd win the World Series with him, but you can't tell me. I mean, they have the best record in baseball. You can't tell me they don't have enough mean with one additional pitcher or potentially win.
I'll just counter argue for the Milwaukee Brewers specifically. If you're running a model of like what gives them the most extra probability, it's not more pitching. They got pitching down. They have no hitting. So it's like, you could certainly argue that yes, you invest in variance, but not in the part where you're already in the tail.
Seems reasonable. Seems reasonable.
Adding him on top of nothing improves.
Who's their second? I don't even know, Shane. I'm just asking this honestly. Who's their second best pitcher, and how great is he? Because that pitcher is going to have to pitch in the postseason too, as many times probably as Mizrowski as well. So I'm saying, is the gap between potentially Skubal and their second best pitcher, or imagine Mizrowski becomes the number 2 starter. He's now going against the second best pitcher on another team.
And again, if you think that winning the World Series is just entirely based on who you got number 1 and who you got number 2 in your starting rotation, yes, but you do have to hit as well. And they have no.
But it's harder to move that needle. But Shane, it's harder to move that needle with a single player than it is move the pitching needle with a single player, right? If you're gonna add one player,
I agree, but we're talking about moving a needle off of what you actually kind of what will change your win probability in the postseason.
Okay,
I guess I'm making and we've all got a probability model. I've kind of feel like they've maxed out their pitching probability, and so
I'm looking right now
on the offensive side.
I have to say, Shane, I'm looking at it right now, and they have the best pitcher in baseball, but their next best on the starting side is number 36. It's their bullpen that's winning them. They seem to be in need of a starter. If it ask me, like Kyle Harris.
Okay, hold on. Let's not stay with the Brewers too long.
I love Shane. Should have made this trade. It's just you guys are acting like it's completely obvious that they should have made it.
Well, it reminds me, we've had this discussion a little bit. I forget where we had this conversation, but it reminds me of the Cubs decision, their World Series year, to go grab that reliever they rented the reliever for the rest of the season at great cost, and that in their models
He wasn't
they said,
Chapman?
yeah, Chapman. I believe I've heard that their models moved from 25% chance of winning the World Series to 30. It's a massive jump with a single player, but that's they just took a chance. And this is Eric. I've heard a number of sophisticated operators running teams say, all you can do is you want to be competitive, and then want to get lucky. And what we're saying is you don't have to leave that last step just to the gods. You want to be competitive, and then where you can, if you can, dial up the variance.
Yeah.
But I'm also asking the more general question is, if we think the Brewers are really sharp, and my God, they clearly are, they're outperforming expectations every year for 10 years. Where is the risk of analytics in pursuit of mean edges missing the bigger picture, that there's some other parameters to play with here? Where else might that happen? I just wonder where else analytics might get that. Analytics is little.
Just so you know, in the rundown, I gave an example from football. Maybe it's not exactly your case, Cade, but maybe it is. I was just wondering, I keep reading article after article about this quarterback battle for the Browns, and I'm ignoring his personality and stuff off the field. It's hard for me to argue that potential upside of Shedeur Sanders isn't higher than that of Deshaun Watson. Like, I think we know what Deshaun Watson is. I'm not saying Deshaun Watson isn't better than Shedeur Sanders. I don't know. But all I'm saying is I don't know. So I don't think Watson is that was my whole comment. Remember, I wrote in the rundown, my hands are here. I have not typed it in since you asked your question. I said, play the variance.
But Eric, I don't, is that even fair? Shane will have a more informed opinion than me, but it feels to me like there is a big question over what the current Deshaun Watson's upside is. We know what it was in his first couple of years, but we genuinely don't know whether he still has that in him or not.
You brought it up, I think I think Deshaun Watson is the if you believe in investing in variance, Deshaun Watson is actually the selection, because we know he's all the way from being unplayable to being a near MVP level, that we've actually observed, right? And so we've seen the sample of the population of Deshaun Watson performance has incredibly high variance.
Oh, I was closer to 50 than 60 when he was that. That's a long time ago. He doesn't have momentum.
No, that's right. That's right. We're not talking about
parity. It's a long time ago.
Shedeur Sanders has not shown that kind of range of performance.
There's open question on what Shedeur's. Eric would say, look, he's a younger player. Ambiguity, like we really don't know. Shane's saying we know the support on Deshaun. It's really wide, and Eric's going, well, we don't even know what the support is on Shedeur. He's too young to know that.
And
I think maybe we agree that the Browns have two kind of high variance options.
We can agree with that.
There's no high mean option. Certainly, I feel like.
What else? While we're in the football world, what else is camps open? Guys have been going at it for about a week at least in most camps. I think we have some games coming up.
I'll just ask a question about the Buccaneers. So, there's been lots of stats that have gone around, whether it's completion percentage, touchdowns, yards after the catch, quarterback efficiency, that the last 3 years, Baker Mayfield has been better than Patrick Mahomes. Now, it's a fact. It's an empirical fact. No, I'm just saying, statistically, Shane, it's a fact. So my question becomes then, why aren't the Buccaneers willing to invest more than 2 years in a quarterback who has shown look, I'll give him, he's not Josh Allen. Come on. He's not any of those people. But is he the 10th best quarterback in the league, plus or minus 3? Sure. Yeah, he's that good. And I was just surprised that someone who has produced as well as he has, it hasn't been for 3 games, for the last 3 years, and he's not that old, he's 30, with a longer term contract, given, what his performance has been. I'm not saying his next 3 years are going to be better than Patrick Mahomes. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is his last 3 were on par with Patrick Mahomes.
It would be, it would be interesting. What those stats are. maybe this is not a very analytics kind of response, but we've both watched football intensely over the last 3 years. Who's a better quarterback?
Well, it's a good question. No, it's a good question.
He doesn't want you to think about it. He wants you to give the answer.
Who won a Super Bowl in that span, by the way?
Who would you rather have had as your Bucs quarterback?
Than Baker Mayfield?
I would say if you'd asked me 3 years ago, not close. If you asked me 2 years ago, I would have said closer. If you asked me the last season, I'm not sure who the better quarterback was last season. Even forget the injury. I'm not even talking about that. I don't think Patrick Mahomes has played that well over the last 12 to 18 months. But if you're asking me, if you're asking me 3 years ago, not even close. 2 years ago, getting closer. Last year, so maybe if I integrate over those 3 years and I want to put some trajectory on it, we'll see what happens this year.
And maybe the part of the answer here, Eric, is kind of returning back to our kind of variance argument before, is that I kind of feel like there's with Baker, I kind of feel like maybe the hesitation to kind of give him essentially sort of the elite franchise quarterback money is, there's not the evidence of the kind of like, this is a person who can kind of take us on a deep run. And that, I mean, you often don't get to observe that because of teams surrounding it. It's not entirely Mayfield's fault that they maybe haven't experienced a deep run while he has been leading them. But I kind of feel like it's sort of maybe to the extent that teams are, when they're signing that big money, are looking at kind of the ceiling of these players. Obviously, that's really where you kind of see the difference between.
I know these are just summary stats. Just one stat, just to tell you. I know these are just summary stats, and this isn't everything. But over the last 3 seasons, Patrick Mahomes has 75 touchdowns and 36 interceptions. Baker Mayfield has 95 touchdowns and 37 interceptions. He has a higher completion rate. He's thrown for more yards. And so I'm not saying he's a better player. All I'm saying is let's not make it seem that, at least on aggregate statistics, he isn't comparable on traditional measures of performance. That's all I'm saying. And you could argue better on some.
Could it be just because he's irritating? Is that possible?
Well, speaking of irritating, that Eric's using my precious online time and making me defend Patrick Mahomes of all people. This is cruel, but
okay. I have a football question for y'all.
Yeah.
The general question is, what do you expect? How do you think about the Ravens this year when they have a lot of the same roster, not the same roster, but a lot of the same roster, but an entirely different coaching staff? And in particular, the coaching staff is probably on average 10 years younger than the previous coaching staff. And you might think about this from a modeling perspective. Coaching is kind of outside of most models. How would you tweak up your expectations for the Ravens this year, given that kind of changeover among coaches? And in particular, the youth, is that net positive, net negative? Like, how do you think about it?
I mean, I think the youth probably is. I think John Harbaugh, I've got nothing but respect for his incredibly long tenure there. But probably the youth, it seemed like they did need some sort of change. I just don't know how to I don't know how I'm going to be able to, we'll deconvolve kind of whatever boost maybe a new coaching staff has is going to be very confounded with, I think they kind of just underperformed. The play, had a lot of underperformance last year. And again, you could, it's circular because maybe because of coaching, it was underperformance. But if they didn't change the coaches, I feel like last year I would almost expect a regression up from that team anyway.
I see.
And so, now you add the kind of coach in the mix. I think those are going to be kind of confounded together. I mean, I think it's going to move in both the same direction. I expect the Ravens to be much better this year than they were last year. But
and the only thing I would do, Kate, to try to tie the last two topics you brought up together is we have to agree that I think under the Harbaugh coaching style, which again, no one's saying he's not a very accomplished coach, been very successful in this league. Maybe the matchup between him and Lamar Jackson in that style is not optimal. And so why don't we add variance, bring in another coach who's got a totally different style, potentially, of coaching the offensive side of the ball. And maybe, we don't know, maybe this is much better for Lamar Jackson. Now, it's hard to argue it would be much better because the guy's, 2-time, I forget, or 3-time MVP.
Two-time MVP.
But
I think he's already second highest rushing yards for a quarterback.
No. I know. I'm just commenting.
Eric, what in particular are you thinking about possible mismatch between Harbaugh's offense and Lamar? Was there a specific idea?
Yeah. So obviously for a long period of time, he had King Henry, right? And so that led to maybe Lamar Jackson should be taking more chances and throwing the ball deeper. Like I've always felt that John Harbaugh, that is, had a more conservative coaching style. And maybe you have to let Lamar inject some variance. Maybe he's going to have more mistakes, but maybe he's also going to have more big plays. And we know that big plays are very much correlated with success in the NFL. So maybe somebody who's willing to let Lamar Jackson open up the field more, maybe throw down the field more, maybe run the ball a little bit less and throw a little bit more. Those are the things I have in mind, but there may be others.
Well, this raises the question of what role head coaches who aren't the coordinator, aren't the traditional offensive guys side of the ball, like what influence they have on the game plans, on big plays, big moments. Because certainly they had offensive coordinators making a lot of those choices. But of course, he hired the offensive coordinators. Okay. Fellas, in the last couple of minutes, anything else around the world of sports, particularly heavier?
I have one more for football. So if I asked you right now to project whether Saquon Barkley's 2026 will be more like his all-time great year of 2024 or his extraordinarily average year of 2025, he's getting towards the ripe old age. He's going to turn 30 this season. He's 29, but he's played for 8 years. Matter of fact, we were talking with Travis about mileage on pitchers. How about mileage on running backs, which is a topic we've talked about over the last 12 years. But if you had to bet right now, is his year more like the 5.8 a carry he had in 2024 or the 4.1 a carry he had in 2025? Which one are you going with?
I mean, athletically, he's obviously closer to his 2025 version than his 2024 version. That said, I mean, we were just talking about you were just talking about the Ravens and Lamar and the potential for like scheme to play a big role. The Eagles offense last year was disastrously coached. Right.
It was terrible.
And so I think, I maybe this is just hope or optimism, but I do think you could imagine maybe a bounce back year on a part of a lot of the offensive players if they can kind of get together. I mean, they don't have the same type of talent. They don't have the exact same talent this year compared to last year as well. But I'm at least cautious that Saquon can get back a little bit towards that 2024 version when they have a little bit more kind of, of a system in there that actually moves the ball.
Well, I want to acknowledge that if we were going to really do it, Eric was giving us homework or a hackathon. There's lots that we would go get. Shane and I could go build a model. There's a lot of advanced stats. We'd do homework on the new system versus the old system. So there's lots more sophisticated ways to answer this question. But I'm going to go with the simplest way, which is he's more or less giving us an over-under of 4.95 yards per carry. And I'm hands down, no question, going under. Like there's no question, especially with a 2 year later.
I'll go under on that as well.
Yep.
All right. It's fun that we're talking football. Guys, on the college front, fall camp's about to start as well. So pros underway, college is underway real soon. And we are solidly back. Pads are coming on in NFL camps.
There's no change to the playoff this year in college football. Is it the same as last year?
There's a couple of very minor changes, but nothing structural. Still 12 teams. Notre Dame has, got to walk into the playoffs. There's something about, I think the conference champions are no longer guaranteed the top 4 spots.
That I remember. Yes, I remember that.
It's just the top 4 rated. But otherwise it's more or less the same. The big difference, Eric, the rhetoric that everyone's focused on is the SEC has just gone from 8 conference games to 9 conference games. And the SEC was already complaining about their strength of schedule and not being sufficiently considered. Like a 9-3 team might be better than a 10-2 team because they played a tougher schedule. That rhetoric is already through the ceiling because of the additional game they're playing, the additional SEC game. So get ready now. I mean, you're going to be tired of it. I mean, most of us are tired of it already who've been paying attention to college football this summer. It's going to get so old. Even if you're sympathetic, it's going to get old, this conversation about strength of schedule between SEC and Big Ten in particular. Oh, well, also, I mean, ACC and Big 12, that's a whole different thing. That's comparing refrigerators to ovens.
And I'll just say, to wrap up my thoughts for the day, I'm shocked that given the Red Sox performance in the last 26 games, Shane is not wearing his Red Sox hat. Why is he wearing his hat? Because I'm going to tell you something. They raked the Dodgers.
Yeah.
This is
23-3 in the last 26.
No,
That's absurd. It's completely absurd.
It's who they've played too.
Yeah.
They're 23-3. They're not just back in playoff contention. There's no reason to believe they're not playing as well as anybody in the AL right now. Why would you? I'm not saying to ignore the first half of the season, but I'm willing to ignore a lot of the first half of the season given the way they're playing now.
Isn't their acquisition at the trade deadline one of the bigger stories as well? If we weren't all talking about the Dodgers, we talk about the catcher they got from the Orioles.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree. And I mean, in defense of me wearing a Phillies cap, for those of you watching on YouTube or wherever, it was a very humid weekend this past weekend in Philadelphia, and I was wearing my Red Sox. So my Red Sox cap is in the wash, but it's getting a lot of use. I mean, they've been so fantastic. What a fun team to watch.
Well, enjoy that, Shane. Why don't we wrap it there then? On behalf of the whole team, Eric Bradlow, Shane Jensen, who've been through the whole show here. Adi Wyner had to slip away, take care of some business. Travis Sawchik, our guest this week. Jacob Grodnick, our producer. Dee Patel, the boss lady. Many thanks to all you guys. Thank you, the listeners, as well. Come back and join us next time. Between now and then, enjoy your sports.